All right, man. So we got some pretty big news for Kamala Harris here. So as you guys know, in the debate there was a surprise name drop, and that was actually of Polish people. Polish Americans got a pretty surprise name drop. They're not really mentioned for much, outside of I think like the sausage or something like that. But they don't really get much mention, and it's not a voter group that's really talked about very often. But they got this big name drop, and Kamala Harris is trying to sort of inject that because Polish people really don't like Poland, and Polish people really, really hate Russia. That puts them in a lot of weird scenarios because a lot of times, like Poland and stuff, they're very like xenophobic, Islamophobic, homophobic, etc. So it puts them in this weird middle ground where they're like fudge. They're kind of more similar to them. They are more similar to them in social policy ideas, but they're just very different because they don't want to be like Russia's underling like they were back in the Soviet Union's days. So here's this article. It says Harris courts Polish American votes in Pennsylvania. Polish Americans are an important, if politically overlooked, demographic, but in Pennsylvania, many have tended to lean Republican. So keep in mind, Pennsylvania is a dogfight. It's going to be a straight dogfight, and it's a pure toss-up right now. The only state I think that's really a harder dogfight is North Carolina. So even the smallest of a little thing can change this result in terms of Pennsylvania. It's going to be so damn close. But we're going to look at this here and see how close it's going to be in terms of what's going on with this Polish American vote. So it says Polish Americans are not an ethnic group that typically gets mentioned in modern American presidential debates. So when Vice President Kamala Harris noted Pennsylvania's large Polish American population, as she discussed the threat that Russia poses to Poland, Timothy L. Kuzma was pleasantly surprised. You start talking about Poland and Polish Americans, his ears are going to perk up, said Mr. Kuzma, national president of the Polish Falcons of America, a non-profit fraternal benefit organization that provides life insurance for its members and is based in Pittsburgh. In the battleground state of Pennsylvania, Polish Americans, who comprise more than 5% of the population, are an important, if politically overlooked, demographic. Many of Pennsylvania's roughly 700,000 Polish Americans share a common fear that Vladimir V. Putin has ambitions to restore the former Soviet Union's sphere of influence in Eastern Europe, including Poland. So 700,000 Polish Americans in the state. And what's interesting enough, like we just talked about what's going on with the Haitian Americans right now because Trump is outwardly sort of antagonizing that group, right, of people with spreading lies about, what's going on with like Haitians in Springfield, Ohio or whatever. They're a group that I think typically goes Democrat. This would be interesting. And I don't know if a majority of Polish voters go Republican, but like a good amount of them go Republican. So whereas kind of with the Haitian vote, for the most part, you'd be dealing with just boosting turnout, which would boost your numbers. Here you would potentially be dealing with, flips, right, where you could actually flip people who are going to vote red into voting blue. It says, but there's less agreement among them on whether Vice President Harris or Donald J. Trump would more effectively deal with Mr. Putin. Dr. Barbara Zawadzki, a retired Pittsburgh physician whose parents escaped to the United States from communist Poland in 1960, said she feared that Mr. Trump would accede to Mr. Putin's demands for Ukrainian territory. When one looks back at the foreign policy of his first term, he was only interested in Putin's approval, Dr. Zawadzki, 74, said of Mr. Trump. That is why he wanted to decrease the importance of NATO. He was playing right into Putin's hand. So she was going pretty hard also in the debate on like being pro-NATO. It's kind of like not like a position that people are going to really take a large side on either way, I think, in terms of being like, oh man, well that person's pro-NATO, that's why I voted for them. Like no one's ever going to say that kind of thing. But I think it's an interesting strategy of like, hey, Donald Trump is somebody who's going to be more sort of okay with Vladimir Putin being able to expand, and so that's going to end up allowing Poland to, be more likely to be taken over. And so Polish Americans, hey, look out, do you want Poland to be taken over? I think it's a pretty interesting strategy. She supports Ms. Harris's plan to continue backing Ukraine's military effort to repel Russia, even as Mr. Trump has suggested that a deal could be brokered to avert more suffering. If Ukraine goes to Putin, it is the beginning of a domino effect. I think Poland could be the next domino, as could be the Baltic countries. So we're back at the domino effect. The domino effect last time happening in like Indochina during the Cold War. Looks like we're in the domino effect for like the Slavic countries or Baltic countries, I guess you'd call them. Polish immigrants arrived in Pennsylvania in large numbers in the late 19th century and early 20th century to work in the steel mills and coal mines in places like Pittsburgh and Wilkes-Barre. The state also attracted a smaller number of doctors and intellectuals from Poland who came to work in hospitals and universities. Another mention as well, two other battleground states, Wisconsin and Michigan, also have large Polish populations, and more generally, the nation's ethnic Polish population is still I don't know if concentrated is the word you want to use here for a Polish population, but there's a lot of them in the Northeast and Upper Midwest. In Pennsylvania, the 2020 presidential race was decided by 80,555 votes. So Polish voters could prove decisive if they were to line up largely behind Mr. Trump or Ms. Harris in this November's election. I'm personally telling you right now, even like the smallest thing can be really massive in this race because it's going to be so effing close, especially in a dogfight. Like, Michigan is not a dogfight, you know what I mean? Like, Arizona is not a dogfight, in my opinion, but Michigan you probably definitely agree with. But, Pennsylvania is about to be a dogfight. Like, anything could flip this effing state, right? So literally anything is super important. And I think Trump's strategy is to sort of like alienate as many, well, not his strategy, he's maybe not doing this on purpose, but the Trump campaign keeps alienating more and more groups. And so Kamala's strategy appears to be to make a bigger and bigger tent. So a bigger tent a bigger group that she's opening up the tent to now is moderate Republicans. Another group also, like for example, Trump is sort of alienating. I guess a lot of JD Vance is doing a lot of it too, where he was saying that, like grandmother's only role was to raise children and, childless women, cat ladies or whatever. They're alienating as many groups as humanly possible. So Kamala Harris is countering with, okay, you're going to send these people away? Well, I'm going to put them in my tent. I'm going to open up my tent and give them room. And it'll be an interesting strategy in terms of seeing if it ends up working out. I do think this time around, I think there will be, like, I'm not saying it's going to be an extreme amount. It's going to be small, but there may be some moderate Republican vote that ends up voting for Kamala Harris. I think in 2016 it was really non-existent. In 2020 it actually started up. I think Mary Trump kind of helped start that kind of trend. Now it's Mary and I think someone else, and then a bunch of there's a senator that came out. I can't remember if it was Toomey, and there's an Arizona. I can't remember if it was a mayor or then you have like I think Gonzalez, the AG, former AG, just came out too. There's like a bunch of like these Republicans coming out saying it now. Liz Cheney and Dick Cheney and everyone. So the strategy is build the tent. And so this is something that could potentially work, but there does appear to be a little bit of a potential caveat with the Polish voters. So we'll have to see kind of how this goes. Because what it ends up saying here down when we look at this. So it says, while this group may share an affinity for Poland, it is far from united politically on issues affecting the United States, and many lean, quote, heavily Republican, said Oscar Swan, a professor emeritus of Slavic languages and literatures at the University of Pittsburgh. I think it was a logical and ingratiating thing for Harris to say about Poland and Polish Americans during the debate, Professor Swan wrote in an email, but it's wishful thinking on her part if she thinks she's going to make inroads on this group. Mr. Trump in 2020 won a majority of votes in 8 of the 10 Pennsylvania neighborhoods with the highest amount of Polish residents, a time analysis found, though the margins were not large. The Reverend Miroslaw Stelmaszczyk, a Catholic priest in Pittsburgh, is among the Polish Americans unmoved by Ms. Harris's call-out during the debate. He said he was proud when he heard the vice president mention his native Poland, where he has family members who worry about Russian aggression. But he plans to vote Mr. Trump partly because the Republicans plan to clean up the immigration system in the United States. Immigration, he said. So I think there seems to be something like, I don't know if it's true, but I have definitely heard that like generally the Polish sort of diaspora is more like sort of disconnected from being Polish than others. Even if they do identify with being Polish or are sort of with Poland, they still will put that aside and kind of look at what's going on in America instead. Also, there's always, unfortunately, amongst a lot of immigrant groups, like even people whose heritage immigrated here, whatever, they'll be anti-immigrant themselves, even I think a lot of the Mexicans right now. So a very, very unfortunate scenario there. But that is kind of the caveat. But the only other thing is, this does provide you a possibility, right? Where it's like, this quote says, you can't put a singular label on Polish American voters, is what Kuzma said. But it does give you a possibility of, hey, can you flip voters, right, as opposed to just boosting turnout? Because with Haitians, you probably aren't going to like flip all that many votes just because there's probably not that many Republicans. But, with this one, you potentially could actually flip people. So it'll be interesting. And I don't know if you can make like a meme of it out of this point, but like how massive the Kamala tent is right now is pretty hilarious. So it'd be pretty funny to just kind of be able to look at and see like, okay, where exactly is this tent going to stand? But Polish Americans, I don't know if any Polish Americans are going to comment on this post. Where do you stand on this vote? What is your sort of feeling in terms of your family members or your friends and what's kind of going on? Also, general comments on like, the diaspora stuff. Definitely let me know down below, especially if you're in, one of these states that's really impactful, like, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, etc. But super interesting to see this sort of growth and genesis of we'll call it the Kamala tent is what we're gonna we'll call it from here on out the Kamala tent. That's what we'll call it. And so as it continues to grow and grow, or potentially grow and grow, you know, there's a potential right now. You know, we'll potentially have this Kamala tent going.